Multicellular organisms are quite complex, so it's quite amazing that they comprise of only 4 basic types of tissues, which are connective tissue, epithelial tissue, nervous tissue, and muscle tissue. So we'll take a look at those 4 different types of tissue in more detail. So connective tissue provides support and holds various parts of the body together. Its main role is basically to bind and support other types of tissues together, but also to protect against damage, infection, and heat loss. The structure of connective tissue is very much related to its function, and in vertebrate animals there are various types of connective tissue, such as fibrous connective tissue, which forms tendons in your body, and the tendons of course connect muscle to bone, which is very important. Another example of a connective tissue is loose connective tissue. And loose connective tissue is directly under your skin, so if you pinch the back of your hand, you can pull up the skin, but what prevents it from separating completely from the cells underneath that is the loose connective tissue. Blood is also another type of connective tissue, which are very specialized white and red blood cells, as well as platelets that exist in that blood. Bone is another type of connective tissue, which is obviously very different from the 3 previous examples. Bone is a lot more dense and hardened cells. Then you have cartilage, which you'll find at the end of your bones, and this provides cushioning between each of your bones so they don't simply grind down together. And then finally, another main type of tissue in vertebrates is adipose tissue, which is effectively the fat tissues which provide a lot of warmth in your body, but also storage of energy such as glycogen. Epithelial tissue is a covering that protects organs, lines the body cavities, and covers the surface of the body. These cells line the internal and external surfaces of your organs, such as blood vessels, digestive organs, kidney tubules, skin, and airways. These cells are usually organized into tightly packed single or layered sheets from which they get their name. And this cell organization actually increases their effectiveness as barriers that protect against mechanical injury, but also from invasion from microorganisms and loss of fluid. As well as providing a barrier and protecting organisms, some epithelial tissue may be specialized to function in absorption, secretion, or excretion. So, for example, the epithelial tissue that lines your respiratory tract secretes mucus that lubricates the surface and keeps it moist. Epithelial cells are categorized based on the number of layers of cells present and their shape. Those are 2 ways in which you can classify epithelial cells. So for example, you can see in the first row here that all of these cells are referred to as simple. And that's because they have a single layer of cells. They all consist of a tissue of a single layer of cells. However, they vary in their shape, which gives them their second name. So squamous refers to the fact that these cells are flat, so a single layer of flat cells. Whereas cuboidal, you can see that these cells are more cube-shaped, and of course the columnar cells are tall and arranged like columns. Now the structure of each of these tissues very much relates to its function. So for example, simple squamous cells can be found lining blood vessels and the alveoli in the lungs, and their job is to basically permit exchange of nutrients, wastes and gases. And that makes sense because you're only going to want a very thin flat layer of cells to maximize the diffusion of gases and nutrients and remove wastes through those organs. If there's multiple layers of epithelial tissue on top of each other, it's actually referred to as stratified. Stratified meaning multiple layers. They still gain their second name from the shape of the cells. So squamous again for flat, cuboidal and columnar. And the function of these types of epithelial tissue relates directly to their function. So for example, the stratified squamous cells, which you'll find on the outer layers of the skin, vagina and mouth, protect against abrasion, drying out and infection, whereas the stratified cuboidal cells can be found on sweat gland duct, lining your sweat gland duct. And this basically secretes water and ions, which is your sweat. The last type of tissue is muscle tissue. And muscle tissue is made up of thin and very long thread-like cells called muscle fibers. And these muscle fibers contract when they're stimulated by nerve impulses from nerve tissue. And there's three different types of muscle tissue. There's skeletal muscle, which is a voluntary muscle. In other words, you actually have control over these muscles in order to move your body, such as this illustration of bicep and tricep here. You're actually able to control those muscles to move your arm. Cardiac muscle, on the other hand, is involuntary. In other words, you don't actually have control over these muscles. You don't have to actually think about contracting the muscles in your heart. They just do this automatically to keep you alive. And that is exactly where you find cardiac muscles. Cardiac meaning heart. Finally, there's smooth muscle, which are actually mostly involuntary muscles found internally in blood vessels, but also in the walls of organs.